The Beaumont estate stood like an island of marble and glass amid the lush Connecticut countryside. From the outside, its imposing facade projected success, wealth, and the American dream fully realized. Inside, however, a different reality played out daily around the mahogany dining table that dominated the East Wing. "Daniel, please. Just 3 more bites," Jonathan Beaumont pleaded, his authoritative voice, the same one that commanded boardrooms and secured billion-dollar deals, now reduced to desperate bargaining with his 8-year-old son. Daniel stared at the meticulously arranged plate before him, his small fingers tightening around the silver fork but never lifting it. His hollow cheeks and the dark circles under his eyes told a story that the finest pediatricians in New York couldn't solve. The boy hadn't eaten a proper meal in the 6 months since his mother's accident. "Mr. Beaumont, Dr. Winters, the 4th nutritional specialist this month, cleared her throat. Perhaps we should consider more aggressive options. The feeding tube we discussed." Jonathan's fist crashed against the table, causing the crystal glasses to tremble. "No tubes, no hospitals. He stays home." The specialists exchanged glances across the table, the kind of silent communication adults used when they thought children weren't paying attention. Daniel noticed. He always noticed everything since Mom left. "Daddy doesn't understand," Daniel whispered to the empty chair beside him, the one where his mother used to sit. His words were so faint that only Mrs. Parker, the housekeeper who had been with the family for decades, caught them as she entered with fresh water. Mrs. Parker's eyes softened. At 67, she had watched the Beaumont family transform from a young, hopeful couple with a newborn into this fractured portrait of grief. "Mr. Beaumont," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Ms. Rodriguez called. She won't be returning to work tomorrow. Or ever, it seems." Jonathan barely looked up. "Another nanny quitting? That's the 3rd this month." He rubbed his temples, the weight of running an empire seemingly lighter than the burden of helping his son heal. "Call the agency again." "I did, sir," Mrs. Parker replied. "They've suggested. Well, they mentioned they're running low on candidates willing to commute this far from the city, especially given the circumstances." "Circumstances?" Jonathan's eyebrow arched dangerously. "Doctor..." Winters gathered her notes, suddenly very interested in organizing her papers. "Perhaps I should follow up next week. In the meantime, continue with the supplements and..." "Tell me what they said, Mrs. Parker." "Exactly what they said." Jonathan's voice was ice. The housekeeper straightened her back. "They said no one wants to be responsible for a child who won't eat. They've heard rumors about the specialists, the failed attempts. Some think it's bad luck." Daniel's eyes remained fixed on his untouched food, but his small shoulders hunched further, as though trying to disappear beneath the weight of being labeled a problem. Jonathan stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the marble floor. "Get the agency director on the phone now, in my office." As the adults filtered out, leaving Daniel alone at the vast table, a shadow moved near the kitchen doorway. Clara Johnson had been hired just that morning as a temporary kitchen helper, while the head chef recovered from surgery. She had watched the entire scene unfold while polishing silverware, her presence so quiet that no one had acknowledged her. Clara observed the small boy sitting alone at a table built for 18. She saw his finger trace the wood grain pattern, whispering something to himself, or perhaps to someone only he could see. "Mrs. Parker says you're being difficult again," came a sharp voice, as Olivia Beaumont, Jonathan's sister, strode into the dining room. Her high heels clicked aggressively against the floor, each step an accusation. "Your father has a conference call with Tokyo in 20 minutes. Do you have any idea how important that is?" Daniel's eyes remained downcast. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," Olivia demanded, reaching for his chin. "Excuse me, ma'am," Clara spoke up, stepping forward from the shadows. "I was just about to clear the table." Olivia startled, clearly not having noticed the new staff member. Her eyes narrowed as she assessed Clara, taking in her simple uniform, her tightly coiled hair pulled back in a bun, her hands rough from years of honest work. "And you are?" "Clara Johnson, ma'am. Just started today in the kitchen." "Well, Clara Johnson," Olivia's tone dripped with condescension, "you can clear everything except Daniel's plate. He hasn't been dismissed from the table." Clara nodded respectfully, but as she gathered the other dishes, she paused beside Daniel. Without making a show of it, she slid a small napkin-wrapped package next to his water glass. "My mama always said an empty stomach makes for a heavy heart," she whispered just loud enough for him to hear. Daniel's eyes flickered up, the first real sign of interest he'd shown all day. From his office, Jonathan's voice boomed through the phone, echoing down the hallway. "I don't care what you've heard. I need someone who can handle this situation. Someone experienced, patient. I'll double your standard rate." As Clara retreated to the kitchen, she heard Olivia's final warning to Daniel. "Your father has a dinner meeting tonight. He expects progress by tomorrow, or Dr. Winters will have no choice but to recommend hospitalization." Later that evening, after the house had grown quiet and the night staff took over, Clara finished her shift and prepared to leave. As she passed the grand staircase, she noticed something unusual. The napkin she had left for Daniel, now empty of its contents, carefully folded and placed on the bottom step. Beside it sat a small hand-drawn picture of what looked like a boy and a woman sharing a meal. From upstairs came the sound of Jonathan's voice, breaking with emotion as he spoke on the phone. "I can't lose him too, Richard. I just can't. I'll pay anything, do anything. There must be someone who can help him." Clara picked up the drawing, studying the crude crayon lines. For the first time in months, Daniel Beaumont had reached out to someone, and of all the experts, specialists, and family members in his world, he had chosen to connect with the quiet woman from the kitchen whom no one else had noticed. What no one in the mansion knew was that Clara Johnson had walked through her own valley of loss, and as she tucked the drawing into her pocket, she made a silent promise to a child whose pain she recognized all too well, a promise that would soon change everything in the Beaumont household. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Beaumont mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Clara arrived earlier than required, her mind preoccupied with the small drawing tucked safely in her purse. As she entered through the staff entrance, the household was already in motion. Phones ringing, staff rushing, and the distinct sound of Jonathan Beaumont's voice echoing from his home office. "I don't care what the board thinks. Postpone the meeting if you have to," he barked into his phone. Clara quietly made her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Parker was frantically organizing breakfast trays. "Thank heavens you're here," the older woman sighed, her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. "Mr. Beaumont has summoned every staff member to the dining room in 15 minutes. Some kind of announcement." Clara nodded, feeling slightly out of place. After all, she was merely temporary kitchen help, not permanent staff. Still, she donned her apron and helped Mrs. Parker finish the morning preparations. At precisely 8:30 a.m., the entire household staff, from groundskeepers to personal assistants, stood arranged around the grand dining room. Daniel sat at his usual place, small fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth, his breakfast untouched before him. Jonathan paced at the head of the table, his custom Italian suit impeccable despite the dark circles under his eyes, suggesting another sleepless night. Olivia stood by the window, tapping furiously on her tablet. "The Children's Hospital called again," she announced without looking up. "Dr. Mendez is willing to take Daniel's case, but he insists on admission for at least—" "That won't be necessary," Jonathan interrupted sharply, then turned to address the assembled staff. "I've made a decision." He paused, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "The situation with my son has become untenable. The best specialists in the country have failed, and we're running out of options." Clara watched Daniel's shoulders hunch slightly at his father's words. The boy seemed to physically shrink under the weight of being discussed as a problem rather than a person. "Therefore," Jonathan continued, his voice taking on the decisive tone that had made him famous in boardrooms across America, "I'm offering an incentive to anyone in this house who can help my son return to normal eating habits." He paused dramatically. "I will give my monthly salary." A collective gasp rippled through the staff. Jonathan Beaumont's monthly earnings were the stuff of Wall Street legend. "That's insane, Jonathan," Olivia hissed. "You can't just—" "My mind is made up," he cut her off. "1 month of my salary, approximately $1.2 million, to whoever succeeds where these overpriced specialists have failed." The room erupted in whispers. Mrs. Parker clutched her chest in shock. The gardener exchanged wide-eyed glances with the chauffeur. Even Olivia fell momentarily silent. Clara, standing at the back near the kitchen door, remained still. Her eyes weren't on Jonathan or the reacting staff, but on Daniel. The boy's expression hadn't changed, but his fingers had stopped their aimless tracing. He was listening. Mr. Beaumont, the family's private chef, stepped forward, confidence radiating from his posture. "Perhaps what young Daniel needs are more exciting culinary options. With your permission, I could prepare a special menu designed to stimulate his appetite." Before Jonathan could respond, the newly hired child psychologist chimed in. "Actually, food aversion is often a control mechanism. I suggest a behavioral approach where—" Soon, everyone was talking over each other, proposing solutions and strategies. eyes gleaming with the prospect of an astronomical payday. Throughout the commotion, Daniel remained silent, his breakfast growing cold. Clara observed how no one, not a single person in the room, had thought to ask Daniel what he wanted. They spoke around him, about him, but never to him. "Enough!" Jonathan finally shouted, silencing the room. "I want results, not theories. Starting today, each of you will have your chance. Mrs. Parker will coordinate a schedule." He checked his watch. "I have a board meeting in the city. I expect progress by dinner." As the staff dispersed, energized by the challenge, Clara noticed Daniel slipping away from the table, leaving yet another untouched meal behind. On impulse, she followed him, maintaining a respectful distance as he wandered into the mansion's vast library. The boy climbed onto the window seat overlooking the gardens, pulled his knees to his chest and stared outside. Clara hesitated at the doorway, unsure if she should intrude. "He thinks he can buy a solution." Daniel's voice, so soft and unexpected, nearly startled her. "But Mom can't come back no matter how much money he spends." Clara stepped into the library, keeping her voice gentle. "Your father loves you very much." Daniel turned, truly looking at her for the first time. "You're the lady from yesterday, the one who left me the cookie." She nodded. "My name is Clara. It was a good cookie," he said, a ghost of a smile passing over his face. "I haven't tasted cinnamon in a long time. My grandmother's recipe," Clara replied, moving closer but maintaining enough distance to not overwhelm him. "She taught me that food isn't just for the body. It feeds the soul, too." Daniel studied her curiously. "Are you going to try to make me eat for the money?" The directness of his question hung in the air between them. Clara considered her answer carefully. "No," she finally said. "I think you'll eat when you're ready. And that's something no amount of money can rush." Something in Daniel's expression shifted, a barely perceptible relaxation around his eyes. He turned back to the window. "My mom used to read here with me," he said after a moment. "She said books were like food for your imagination." Clara smiled. "Your mom sounds very wise." Before Daniel could respond, Olivia's voice cut through the moment. "There you are!" She strode into the library, heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood. Her eyes narrowed at Clara. "Shouldn't you be in the kitchen? We don't pay staff to socialize." "Yes, ma'am," Clara replied, already backing toward the door. "I was just—" "Spare me the explanations," Olivia interrupted. "Daniel has a session with Dr. Wilson in 5 minutes." She turned to her nephew. "And you. Your father is expecting progress. Real progress, Daniel." As Clara returned to her duties, the mansion became a flurry of activity. Throughout the day, staff members took turns attempting their strategies with Daniel. Elaborate meals prepared by the chef, behavior charts from the psychologist, even bribery attempts from some of the more desperate household employees. By evening, tensions were running high. Every approach had failed spectacularly. Daniel had not taken a single bite all day. Clara worked quietly, preparing staff meals and cleaning up after each failed attempt with Daniel. As dinner approached, she overheard Mrs. Parker on the phone with Jonathan. "Yes, sir, everyone has tried." "No, sir, no progress yet." "Yes, sir, we'll keep trying." The housekeeper's voice was strained with anxiety. When Jonathan returned that evening, his expression was thunderous. "Nothing? Not one bite all day?" he demanded as he strode into the dining room where Daniel sat before yet another untouched plate. "We've tried everything, sir," Mrs. Parker replied, wringing her hands. "Perhaps tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" Jonathan's voice rose. "It's been 6 months of perhaps tomorrow. My son is wasting away while I'm surrounded by supposed professionals who can't solve a simple problem." Daniel flinched at his father's outburst, his small face paling. "Jonathan," Olivia interjected, "shouting isn't helping." He ran a hand over his face. "You're right. He couldn't finish the sentence. The mighty CEO, known for his articulate speeches and decisive leadership, couldn't find words for the helplessness he felt watching his son suffer. In the tense silence that followed, Clara stepped forward from her position near the kitchen door. "Mr. Beaumont, may I try?" All eyes turned to her, some surprised, others dismissive. "And who exactly are you?" Jonathan asked, taking in her simple uniform. "Clara Johnson, sir. I'm helping in the kitchen while Mr. Reynolds recovers." Olivia scoffed. "You expect us to believe that a temporary kitchen helper can succeed where specialists with decades of experience have failed?" Clara kept her eyes on Jonathan. "I'm not promising success, sir. Just asking for a chance." Jonathan looked at his son, then back at Clara. Desperation won over skepticism. Fine. You have 10 minutes. The room grew still as Clara approached the table. Instead of sitting across from Daniel or trying to coax him, she simply pulled out the chair beside him and sat down. Then, to everyone's surprise, she took out her own packed dinner, a simple container of homemade stew, and placed it between them. My grandmother used to say that no one should eat alone, she said conversationally, as if they were the only two people in the room. When I was little, about your age, I went through a time when food didn't taste right anymore. Daniel's eyes flickered toward her, a spark of interest. Nothing tasted good? He asked quietly. Nothing at all, Clara confirmed, stirring her stew. The rich aroma of slow-cooked vegetables and tender beef filled the air around them. It happened after my own mama passed. Suddenly, everything tasted like cardboard. The room grew utterly silent. No one had made the connection to Daniel's situation so directly before. What happened? Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. Clara smiled gently. My grandmother didn't force me to eat. Instead, she sat with me just like this and told me stories about my mother, about the foods she loved, the meals they shared. And somehow, bit by bit, I found my way back to eating. As she spoke, Clara casually broke off a piece of cornbread that accompanied her stew and placed it on a napkin between them. She didn't push it toward Daniel or even look at it. She simply continued her story, occasionally taking a bite of her own meal. And then, it happened. So naturally that at first no one noticed. Daniel's hand reached out and took the piece of cornbread. He studied it for a moment, then slowly brought it to his lips and took a tiny bite. Jonathan froze, afraid that any movement or sound might break the spell. Olivia's tablet slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. But even that didn't disrupt the moment. Daniel took another bite, then another. Clara continued talking softly, sharing stories of her childhood, creating a bubble of normalcy around them that somehow made eating possible again. When Daniel reached for the spoon and dipped it into Clara's stew, Jonathan had to turn away, overcome with emotion he couldn't let his son see. What had just unfolded wasn't a miracle of medicine or psychology. It was a moment of human connection, of shared understanding, and it had come from the most unexpected source, the quiet woman from the kitchen whom everyone had overlooked. As Daniel took his first real meal in months, no one noticed the single tear that slipped down Clara's cheek, a tear that carried the weight of her own unspoken story, her own connection to the pain this family was enduring. A connection that would soon reveal itself to be far deeper than anyone could imagine. The Beaumont mansion buzzed with a new energy the morning after Clara's breakthrough with Daniel. Staff members whispered in corners, their conversations halting whenever Clara passed by. In the East Wing study, Jonathan paced before floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured grounds, his phone pressed to his ear. "I'm telling you, Richard, it was remarkable," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. He ate, actually ate, not just a bite, but a proper portion. On the other end, Richard Wallace, Jonathan's oldest friend and the company's legal counsel, listened skeptically. And this woman, this kitchen helper, accomplished what teams of specialists couldn't? Just like that? "I watched it happen with my own eyes," Jonathan replied, pausing to observe a gardener trimming the hedges below. There's something about her approach. She didn't pressure him, she just connected. "And now you're seriously considering giving her your monthly salary?" "John, I made a promise," Jonathan interrupted firmly, "in front of my entire household." Richard sighed audibly. "At least let me run a background check before you hand over $1 million check to someone you barely know." "What did you say her name was again?" "Clara Johnson," Jonathan replied, already distracted by the sight of his son walking across the garden with Mrs. Parker. For the first time in months, Daniel's step seemed lighter. "Do whatever you think is necessary, but be discreet. I don't want to disrupt whatever progress we're making." Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Clara worked quietly, chopping vegetables for lunch. She had been reassigned from temporary kitchen help to focusing primarily on Daniel's meals, a promotion that had raised eyebrows among the longer-serving staff. "So," began Sophia, one of the housekeepers, sidling up to the counter, "everyone's talking about your miracle with the boy." Clara continued chopping steadily. "It wasn't a miracle, just patience." "Patience worth over $1 million, Sophia remarked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp with curiosity. "You must have quite the background in childcare." Before Clara could respond, Mrs. Parker entered the kitchen, her authoritative presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. "Sophia, the East Wing bathrooms need attention." The dismissal was clear. As Sophia left with poorly concealed annoyance, Mrs. Parker turned to Clara. "Mr. Beaumont would like you to join Daniel for lunch on the terrace today. He'll be working from home to observe." Clara nodded, continuing her preparations. "How is Daniel this morning?" "He asked for you," Mrs. Parker replied, something softening in her usually formal demeanor. "First thing, wanted to know if you'd be here today." A small smile touched Clara's lips as she carefully arranged sliced apples on a plate, red and green alternating in a simple pattern. "You've accomplished what no one else could," Mrs. Parker continued, lowering her voice. "But I feel I should warn you. Miss Olivia is not pleased. She's been with Mr. Beaumont on the phone all morning." Clara looked up, meeting the older woman's concerned gaze. "I'm just here to help Daniel, Mrs. Parker. The rest doesn't matter to me." "The money doesn't interest you?" Mrs. Parker asked, unable to mask her surprise. Clara turned back to her work, her hand steady but her expression momentarily distant. There are more important things than money. At precisely noon, Clara carried a tray to the terrace where Daniel waited at a small wrought-iron table. Jonathan sat at a distance, pretending to work on his laptop but watching intently. Olivia stood by the French doors, arms crossed, her scrutiny undisguised. "Good morning, Daniel," Clara greeted warmly, setting down the tray. "I thought we might try something simple today." Daniel's eyes brightened slightly at her arrival. "I drew something," he said, pushing a folded paper toward her. Clara opened it to find a childish drawing of two figures, a small boy and a woman with curly hair, sitting at a table with what appeared to be bowls before them. Above the drawing, in uneven lettering, "Me and Miss Clara." "It's wonderful," she said sincerely, noticing how Jonathan leaned forward, straining to glimpse this evidence of his son's engagement. As they began their meal, simple sandwiches cut into triangles with sliced fruit and yogurt, Clara continued her approach from the previous evening, keeping conversation light and sharing stories rather than focusing on the food. Daniel responded, taking bites between questions and comments, the act of eating becoming incidental to their connection. From his vantage point, Jonathan watched in amazement. Twice he started to approach, and twice Olivia subtly shook her head, warning him not to interfere with what was clearly working. "My mom used to cut sandwiches like this," Daniel remarked suddenly, holding up a triangle. Clara nodded encouragingly. "Did she have any special recipes she made for you?" Daniel's face clouded briefly, but instead of withdrawing as he typically did at mentions of his mother, he continued, "Blueberry pancakes on Sundays, with faces made of fruit." "That sounds lovely," Clara responded. "My mother made special Sunday breakfast too. It's a beautiful tradition." "Do you miss your mom?" Daniel asked directly, his eyes suddenly intense. Clara held his gaze, understanding the importance of this moment. "Every day. But I keep her close by remembering the things she taught me, the stories she told me." Daniel nodded slowly, processing this. "Sometimes I forget what Mom's voice sounded like," he admitted, his small voice breaking slightly. Jonathan's sharp intake of breath was audible even at a distance. "That happens," Clara assured him gently. "But then sometimes you'll hear someone laugh a certain way or smell a familiar scent, and suddenly you remember." As their lunch continued, Daniel gradually consumed more food than he had in months, engaged in conversation that, while painful in moments, seemed to be healing something deep within him. By the time they finished, he had cleared most of his plate, a triumph that brought visible relief to Jonathan's tense features. Later that afternoon, as Clara was preparing dinner preparations, Olivia cornered her in the kitchen storage room. "Quite the performance out there," she said coolly, blocking the doorway. Clara met her gaze steadily. "It wasn't a performance, Ms. Beaumont." "Let me be direct," Olivia continued, her manicured fingers tapping against the doorframe. "My brother is vulnerable right now. Desperate, whatever game you're playing." "I'm not playing any game," Clara interrupted, her voice firm but respectful. "I'm simply helping a child who's grieving." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "A child you seem to understand remarkably well for someone who just started working here. Almost as if you knew exactly what approach would work." Clara maintained her composure despite the clear accusation in Olivia's tone. "I understand grief, Ms. Beaumont. That's all." "My sources tell me you specifically applied to work at this house," Olivia pressed. "Out of all the positions available through the agency, you requested the Beaumont estate. Why?" The question hung between them, charged with suspicion. "The position was available and the pay was fair," Clara answered evenly, though something flickered briefly in her eyes. "My brother may be blinded by gratitude, but I'm not so easily fooled," Olivia continued. "I've started looking into your background, Clara Johnson, if that's even your real name." Clara's hands tightened around the vegetables she was holding, but her voice remained calm. "You're welcome to look into my background, Miss Beaumont. I have nothing to hide." Before Olivia could respond, Mrs. Parker's voice called from the main kitchen. "Miss Olivia, your conference call is starting in 5 minutes." With a final warning glance, Olivia stepped back. This conversation isn't over, not by a long shot. As she walked away, Clara leaned against the pantry shelf, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Her hand unconsciously reached for the locket hidden beneath her uniform, a small silver oval containing a photograph few had ever seen. That evening, after Daniel had successfully eaten dinner with Clara's quiet encouragement, Jonathan requested a private meeting with her in his study. The wood-paneled room, lined with leather-bound books and accolades from a stellar business career, felt imposing despite Jonathan's attempt at a casual seating arrangement by the fireplace. "Please sit." He gestured to an armchair opposite his own. "Can I offer you anything? Tea? Something stronger?" "No, thank you, Mr. Beaumont," Clara replied, perching on the edge of the chair, her posture perfect but tense. Jonathan studied her for a moment, this unassuming woman who had accomplished what an army of specialists could not. "I want to thank you properly for what you've done," he began. "These past 2 days, seeing Daniel eat again, hearing him speak about his mother without shutting down completely, it's more progress than we've made in months." Clara nodded acknowledgement, but offered no words to fill the silence. "I made a rather dramatic promise yesterday," Jonathan continued, leaning forward, "about my monthly salary. I want you to know I intend to honor that promise." "That's not necessary, Mr. Beaumont," Clara replied quickly. "I didn't help Daniel for money." Jonathan's eyebrows rose slightly. $1 million isn't necessary? That's not a response I hear often. "What's necessary is that Daniel continues to heal," she said simply. "The rest is just details." Jonathan leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You're not what I expected, Clara Johnson." "What did you expect, sir?" "Someone more calculating, perhaps." The moment I made that offer, I saw the gleam in everyone's eyes. "Everyone except yours." He paused, studying her. "May I ask you something personal?" Clara tensed almost imperceptibly but nodded. "You seem to understand exactly what Daniel is going through. You mentioned your own mother passing when you were young. Is that what gives you this insight?" Clara's hands folded tightly in her lap. "Partly. Grief is universal in some ways, but unique in others. And yet you connect with him so naturally." Jonathan pressed gently, almost as if. "As if what, Mr. Beaumont?" Clara asked when he didn't finish his thought. Jonathan shook his head slightly. "Nothing. Just the ramblings of a grateful father." He stood, signaling the conversation was concluding. "I've arranged for you to have a more permanent position here, focusing primarily on Daniel's care. Mrs. Parker will show you to one of the staff rooms in the East Wing. It would be more convenient than commuting, if that's acceptable to you." "Yes, thank you," Clara replied, rising as well. As she turned to leave, Jonathan added, "One more thing, Clara, my sister. She can be protective, sometimes overly so. If she says anything that makes you uncomfortable, please come to me directly." Clara nodded, understanding the subtext. "Good night, Mr. Beaumont." Later that night, as the mansion settled into darkness, Clara unpacked her few belongings in the small but comfortable staff room. From her bag, she carefully removed a worn leather journal and the silver locket she had been wearing beneath her clothes. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she opened the locket to reveal a small photograph, a smiling woman with a striking resemblance to Eleanor Beaumont, Daniel's deceased mother. Clara's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the journal to a newspaper clipping carefully preserved between its pages. The headline read, "Beaumont Industries CEO's wife dies in tragic accident." Below it, a smaller article that few had noticed. "Second victim in Beaumont car crash, remains in critical condition." A soft knock at her door startled Clara. She quickly closed the journal and tucked it under her pillow before opening the door to find Daniel standing there in pajamas, his small face serious in the dim hallway light. "Daniel, is everything all right?" she asked softly, kneeling to his level. "I had a dream about Mom," he said simply. "She was in the car, but she wasn't alone. There was another lady there too." Clara's face paled slightly, but her voice remained gentle. "Dreams can be very vivid sometimes." Daniel nodded solemnly. "The other lady looked kind of like you." His innocent observation hung in the air between them. "Do you think that means something?" For a brief moment, Clara seemed at a loss for words, the carefully constructed walls around her secret threatening to crumble before this child's simple perception. But before she could respond, Mrs. Parker appeared at the end of the hallway. "Daniel Beaumont, you should be in bed, young man," she called, hurrying toward them. "I'm so sorry, Clara. He must have slipped past the night nurse." As Mrs. Parker led Daniel back to his room, the boy glanced over his shoulder at Clara, his expression curious and somehow knowing beyond his years. Clara closed her door slowly, leaning against it as the weight of her unspoken truth pressed heavily upon her shoulders. In his own bedroom across the mansion, Jonathan sat at his desk staring at an email from Richard that had just arrived. Background check on Clara Johnson shows inconsistencies. Need to talk first thing tomorrow. Something isn't adding up. The moonlight cast long shadows across the room as secrets buried beneath the Beaumont family's grief began their slow, inevitable journey toward the light. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of Jonathan Beaumont's study as he stared at the documents spread across his desk. Richard Wallace sat opposite him, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of a sleepless night. Loosened tie, slight stubble, and bloodshot eyes that suggested hours of research. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Jonathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he tapped a finger on the photograph before him. A hospital ID badge showing a younger Clara Johnson, her hair longer, but her eyes unmistakable. "I've triple-checked everything," Richard confirmed, pulling another document from his briefcase. Clara Johnson was indeed employed at Memorial Hospital during the time of the accident. She wasn't just any nurse. She was in the trauma unit that received Eleanor after the crash. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, the weight of this revelation pressing down on him like a physical force. But that doesn't explain why she sought employment here specifically. Why now? After all this time? Richard hesitated, then slid another document across the desk. There's more. The second victim in the crash, the one barely mentioned in the papers, was Clara's younger sister, Maya Johnson. The color drained from Jonathan's face. What? They were driving in opposite directions on Route 27. Eleanor lost control first. Black ice, according to the police report. Her car spun into oncoming traffic where Maya Johnson's vehicle couldn't avoid the collision. Richard paused, giving his friend a moment to process. Maya survived the initial impact but died 3 days later from her injuries. Clara was her medical proxy, and the one who ultimately had to make the decision to withdraw life support. Jonathan stood abruptly, turning to face the window. The manicured gardens of the Beaumont estate stretched before him, a vision of perfect order that contrasted sharply with the chaos suddenly unleashed in his mind. So she came here for, what? Revenge? To harm Daniel in some way? His hands clenched at his sides. Richard shook his head. If that were her motive, she's had plenty of opportunities. Instead, she's the only one who's been able to help him. He shuffled through more papers. There's something else. After her sister's death, Clara took a leave of absence from nursing. When she returned, she transferred to pediatric care, specializing in children experiencing trauma and grief. He looked up at his friend. By all accounts, she was exceptional at it. Then why lie? Jonathan demanded, turning back to face Richard. Why come here under false pretenses? Hide her background, her connection to us. Would you have hired her if you'd known? Richard asked quietly. The sister of the woman who died alongside your wife? Jonathan had no answer for that. A soft knock at the study door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Parker entered, her expression grave. I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Beaumont, but Miss Olivia is insisting on speaking with you. She says it's urgent. About Clara. Jonathan exchanged glances with Richard before nodding. Send her in. Olivia burst into the room before Mrs. Parker could properly announce her, waving her tablet. I knew something was off about that woman. Look what my investigator found. She thrust the tablet toward her brother, displaying the same hospital records Richard had already uncovered. We're aware, Olivia, Jonathan said wearily. Richard has just briefed me. Olivia blinked, momentarily thrown off her stride before recovering with renewed indignation. Then why is she still in this house? She lied to us, manipulated her way into our home, into Daniel's life. Lower your voice, Jonathan warned, glancing toward the door. Daniel doesn't need to hear this. Daniel doesn't need to be anywhere near that woman, Olivia countered, though she did lower her volume. She's clearly unstable. Who knows what she really wants? Compensation? Some twisted form of justice? Richard cleared his throat. If I may, there's no evidence suggesting Clara has malicious intent. Quite the opposite. Her professional record shows a history of helping children through grief. Olivia scoffed. Oh, please, Richard. Don't be naive. She deliberately concealed her connection to our family. That alone is cause for immediate dismissal. And what about Daniel? Jonathan asked quietly. For the first time in 6 months, he's eating. He's talking about Eleanor without shutting down. He's connected with Clara in a way he hasn't with anyone since the accident. He's connected with a lie, Olivia insisted. Whatever progress you think you're seeing is built on deception. Jonathan turned back to the window, his reflection showing the internal struggle playing across his features. After a long moment, he spoke. I want to hear her explanation. Before we make any decisions, I need to hear from Clara directly. Are you serious? Olivia's voice rose again. You're giving her a chance to spin more tales? I'm giving her a chance to explain, Jonathan corrected firmly. Richard, would you ask Mrs. Parker to find Clara and bring her here? And make sure Daniel is occupied elsewhere, perhaps with his tutor in the West Wing. As Richard left to fulfill the request, Olivia paced the study like a caged tigress. I still think this is a mistake. She should be escorted off the property immediately. Your concern is noted, Jonathan replied, his tone making it clear the discussion was closed. He gathered the documents from his desk, organizing them into a neat stack, a small attempt to control something in a situation spinning rapidly beyond his grasp. 20 minutes later, a soft knock announced Clara's arrival. She entered the study with the same quiet dignity she'd displayed since her first day at the mansion, though her eyes immediately registered the tension in the room and the documents on Jonathan's desk. You wanted to see me, Mr. Beaumont? Jonathan gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit, Clara. Or should I call you Nurse Johnson from Memorial Hospital's trauma unit? Clara's composure faltered for just a moment, a slight widening of her eyes, a barely perceptible intake of breath, before she slowly sat down, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. So you know, she said simply. We know everything, Olivia interjected sharply. We know about your sister Maya. We know you were there when Eleanor died. We know you've infiltrated this household under false pretenses. Clara's eyes never left Jonathan's. I didn't lie about who I am, Mr. Beaumont. My name is Clara Johnson. I did work in hospital administration before coming here. Those facts are true. Lies of omission are still lies, Olivia snapped. Why? Jonathan asked, his voice controlled but edged with emotion. Why come here like this? What do you want from my family? Clara's hands tightened slightly in her lap, the only visible sign of her inner turmoil. I didn't come here for money or revenge or anything you might be thinking. I came because of something your wife said to me. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. Eleanor spoke to you? Clara nodded. In her final hours, I was assigned to her care in the ICU. We knew she wouldn't survive her injuries. She was drifting in and out of consciousness, but in one lucid moment, she grabbed my hand and said, My son Daniel, he won't understand. Please. Clara's voice caught slightly before she steadied herself. She didn't finish her thought, couldn't finish it, but there was such desperation in her eyes, as a mother would be, thinking of her child in her final moments. And you took it upon yourself to interpret this half-sentence as some sort of divine mission? Olivia's tone was scathing. To infiltrate our lives based on the delirious words of a dying woman? Olivia, please, Jonathan warned, raising a hand to silence his sister. His eyes remained fixed on Clara. Continue. Clara took a deep breath. After my sister died, I couldn't return to the trauma unit. I transferred to pediatrics, specializing in children dealing with grief and loss, I thought. I believed I could honor both Maya and your wife by helping children through their darkest moments. She paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. I followed your family's story in the news. I saw the reports about Daniel's declining health, his refusal to eat. I recognized the symptoms of complicated grief. I'd seen it many times in my work. When I learned you were looking for household staff, it seemed like I was meant to help. So you deliberately concealed your connection to our family to get hired, Jonathan stated, his tone neutral but his eyes searching. Yes, Clara admitted without hesitation. And I'm sorry for that deception. I knew you wouldn't hire me if you knew the truth, but I also knew I could help Daniel in ways others couldn't, because I understand his pain from both sides. As someone who's lost a loved one suddenly, and as someone who's professionally trained to help children through that exact trauma. The room fell silent as Jonathan considered her words. Olivia opened her mouth to speak, but a look from her brother silenced her. The breakthrough with Daniel, Jonathan finally said. Was that real or some kind of manipulation? Clara's eyes flashed with genuine hurt. It was absolutely real, Mr. Beaumont. I would never toy with a child's emotions or well-being. Everything I've done has been with Daniel's best interests at heart. How convenient that his best interests aligned with a potential $1 million payday for you, Olivia remarked acidly. I told Mr. Beaumont yesterday that I didn't want the money, Clara replied, her voice firm despite Olivia's provocation. I meant it. Jonathan stood, walking to the fireplace where a portrait of Eleanor hung, radiant in a blue dress, her smile lighting up the canvas. You understand that I cannot allow someone who entered my home under false pretenses to continue caring for my son, he said after a long moment. Clara nodded slowly, resignation in her eyes. I understand. However, Jonathan continued, turning to face her, I cannot ignore the progress Daniel has made with you. It would be irresponsible of me as a father to simply remove the one person who's managed to reach him. Jonathan, you can't seriously be considering, Olivia began, incredulous. I'm not considering, Olivia, I'm deciding. Jonathan's tone brooked no argument. Clara will remain, but under certain conditions. He addressed Clara directly. You will tell Daniel the truth, an age-appropriate version, but the truth nonetheless. He deserves honesty. You will continue to work with him, but Richard will arrange for a qualified child psychologist to oversee and evaluate your interactions, and you will sign a non-disclosure agreement about everything that happens in this house. Clara looked surprised but nodded in agreement. I'll do whatever is best for Daniel. As for the money, Jonathan continued, we'll discuss that at a later date. For now, consider your position here probationary. Olivia made a sound of disbelief. This is a mistake. She can't be trusted. That remains to be seen, Jonathan replied evenly. But Daniel's well-being comes first. Always. He turned back to Clara. You may go now. We'll speak again after you've had your conversation with Daniel. As Clara rose to leave, Jonathan added, One more thing, Clara. Whatever your initial reasons for coming here, I expect complete transparency from this moment forward. No more secrets. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Mr. Beaumont, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily before exiting the study. Once the door closed behind her, Olivia rounded on her brother. Have you lost your mind? You're allowing a woman who lied to us, who has a direct connection to Eleanor's death, to continue caring for your son? Jonathan sat heavily in his chair. What would you have me do, Olivia? Daniel has been drowning in grief for 6 months. Clara is the first person to reach him to help him start processing Eleanor's death in a healthy way. She's manipulating you both, Olivia insisted. Richard, who had remained silent during the exchange with Clara, finally spoke up. I'm not so sure about that, Olivia. Her credentials in pediatric grief counseling are impeccable. The references I checked all praised her exceptional ability to connect with traumatized children. Of course they did. She probably gave you names of friends to call, Olivia scoffed. Jonathan raised a hand, silencing further debate. My decision stands. We'll monitor the situation closely. If there's any indication that Clara's presence is harmful to Daniel, I'll act immediately. Until then, we proceed with caution. Later that afternoon, Clara found Daniel in the mansion's small library, absorbed in a picture book. Her heart raced as she approached, knowing the conversation ahead could either strengthen their bond or destroy it completely. May I join you? She asked softly. Daniel looked up, a smile brightening his face at the sight of her, a smile that made her next task even more difficult. I brought hot chocolate, she added, setting down a tray with 2 steaming mugs topped with tiny marshmallows. With cinnamon? Daniel asked hopefully. Just a sprinkle, Clara confirmed, sitting beside him on the window seat. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Daniel, I need to tell you something important. Something about me, and about your mom. Daniel's expression grew serious, sensing the weight in her tone. Is it bad? Clara considered the question carefully. It's complicated. Do you remember when we first started talking? And I told you I understood what it's like to lose someone you love? He nodded. Well, I lost my sister Maya. She was in a car accident. Clara paused, watching Daniel's face closely. The same accident your mom was in. Daniel's eyes widened, his small body becoming very still. Your sister was in the car with my mom? No, sweetie. They were in different cars. It was icy that day and there was a crash involving both of them. Clara kept her explanation simple but truthful, mindful of Daniel's age. Did you know my mom? Daniel asked, his voice small but steady. Clara nodded slowly. I did, briefly. I was a nurse at the hospital where they took her after the accident. I was there when she was saying goodbye. Daniel's fingers tightened around his mug. Was she scared? The question pierced Clara's heart. No, she answered honestly. She was very brave, and she was thinking of you, right until the end. A tear slipped down Daniel's cheek. She was? Yes. She loved you so much, Daniel. She wanted to make sure you would be okay. Clara fought to keep her own emotions in check, to be strong for the boy in front of her. That's partly why I came here, to help you, the way I wish someone had been there to help me and my sister. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing this information in the remarkable way children sometimes do, with a wisdom beyond their years. Why didn't you tell me before? He finally asked, no accusation in his voice, just genuine curiosity. I was afraid, Clara admitted. Afraid you wouldn't trust me if you knew. Afraid your father wouldn't let me help you. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry. Daniel considered this, taking a small sip of his hot chocolate. Does this mean you have to go away now? No, Clara assured him. Your father has said I can stay as long as it's helping you. She hesitated before adding, but if you don't want me here anymore, if this makes you uncomfortable, I'll understand. Daniel was quiet again, looking out the window at the gardens below. When he finally spoke, his words caught Clara completely off guard. I saw you, you know, in my dreams about the accident. Clara's breath caught. What do you mean? I keep having this dream where I'm in the hospital with Mom, Daniel explained, his voice distant as if recalling the images as he spoke. There's a nurse holding her hand. The nurse is crying too, even though she's trying not to. I think that was you. Clara couldn't speak, overwhelmed by his perception. She had indeed been at Eleanor's bedside, had indeed tried to hide her own tears. For her patient, for her sister lying in another room, for the little boy who would grow up without his mother. Is that why you understand? Daniel asked, bringing her back to the present. Because you were there? Clara nodded, finding her voice again. That's part of it. And because I know what it feels like to lose someone suddenly, without getting to say goodbye properly. Daniel set down his mug and, in a move that took Clara by surprise, leaned against her side. I'm glad you're here now, he said simply. Even if you should have told me sooner. Clara carefully put her arm around his small shoulders, relief washing through her. I'm glad I'm here too, Daniel, and from now on only truth between us, I promise. As they sat together in the quiet of the library, Clara became aware of a presence at the doorway. Jonathan stood watching them, his expression unreadable, as he observed this moment of genuine connection between his son and the woman whose life had intersected with their family in such an unexpected way. Their eyes met briefly over Daniel's head, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This unusual situation, born from tragedy and complicated by secrets, was far from resolved. But for now, in this moment, Daniel's healing had begun, and perhaps, Clara thought, her own healing had too. That evening, as Clara prepared Daniel for bed, a new routine that had developed naturally over the past days, she noticed a photograph on his nightstand that hadn't been there before. It showed Eleanor holding a much younger Daniel, both of them laughing as autumn leaves swirled around them. Dad brought that from his room, Daniel explained, following her gaze. He said it's time I had it by my bed again. Clara smiled, straightening his covers. It's a beautiful picture. Your mom looks so happy. She did, didn't she? Daniel agreed, studying the photograph. Dad said we can talk about her more now, that it might make us sad sometimes, but that's okay. Your dad is very wise, Clara replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. Daniel yawned, his eyes growing heavy. Clara, do you think my mom and your sister are together somewhere, looking out for us? The question, so innocent yet so profound, caught Clara off guard. She thought carefully before answering. I like to think they are, she said softly, and I think they'd be proud of how brave you're being. Daniel nodded, satisfied with this answer as sleep began to claim him. Maybe that's why you found us, he murmured, his words slurring slightly as he drifted off. Maybe they planned it together. As Clara gently tucked the blankets around him, she pondered his words. Perhaps there was a certain cosmic symmetry to it all. Two lives lost in the same tragic moment, and two survivors finding each other months later, each holding a piece of healing the other needed. She quietly left Daniel's room, closing the door softly behind her. In the hallway, she found Jonathan waiting, his tall figure silhouetted against the dim lighting. How did he take it? He asked quietly. Better than I expected, Clara admitted. Children often have a capacity for understanding that we don't give them credit for. Jonathan nodded, his hands in his pockets. He's always been wise beyond his years. Eleanor used to say he had an old soul. The mention of Eleanor's name no longer hung between them like a barrier, but rather as a shared point of reference, a woman they had both known, albeit briefly in Clara's case. "Mr. Beaumont," Clara began hesitantly. "About the money—" "Jonathan, please," he interrupted. "I think we're past formalities at this point." He gestured for her to walk with him, leading them toward the grand staircase. "And regarding the money, I meant what I said. We'll discuss it later." "It's not about that," Clara clarified as they descended the stairs. "I want to propose something else entirely." Jonathan raised an eyebrow, curious. "I'm listening." "Instead of giving me your month's salary, I'd like to suggest establishing a foundation," Clara explained, her voice gaining confidence as she outlined the idea that had been forming in her mind. A foundation in memory of Eleanor and Maya, focused on helping children who've lost parents in sudden traumatic circumstances. Jonathan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the soft lighting of the foyer, Clara could see a mixture of surprise and something else, respect perhaps, in his expression. "You've given this some thought," he observed. Clara nodded. "The truth is, Mr. Beaumont, Jonathan, there are many children like Daniel out there. Children who've lost someone suddenly and don't have access to the kind of support they need. Your resources could make a real difference." For the first time since she'd met him, Jonathan Beaumont's carefully maintained facade seemed to soften completely. "Eleanor would have loved that idea," he said quietly. "She was always looking for meaningful ways to give back." "I never knew her well," Clara admitted, "but in those brief moments at the hospital, I could tell she was an extraordinary woman." Jonathan's eyes grew distant with memory. "She was, and she would approve of what you've done for Daniel." He refocused on Clara. "A foundation is an excellent idea. We can start working on the details tomorrow." As they reached the bottom of the staircase, Olivia emerged from the dining room, her expression souring at the sight of them together. "I see our resident deceptive nurse is still making herself at home," she remarked coldly. "Enough, Olivia," Jonathan said firmly. "Clara stays. That decision is final." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "And when she inevitably hurts Daniel, when whatever game she's playing reaches its conclusion?" Clara met Olivia's hostile gaze steadily. "I understand your suspicion, Ms. Beaumont. In your position, I might feel the same way, but I'm not playing a game. I'm simply trying to help a little boy who's hurting, the same way I've helped many children over the years." "Noble words from someone who lied her way into our home," Olivia shot back. "That's enough," Jonathan intervened, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Clara and I are discussing establishing a foundation in Eleanor's memory to help children dealing with grief. I'd appreciate your support, but I don't require it." Olivia's expression shifted, clearly taken aback by this development. "A foundation?" "Yes," Jonathan confirmed. "Clara has declined the money for herself. Instead, she's proposed something that would honor Eleanor's memory in a meaningful way." For perhaps the first time, Olivia seemed genuinely at a loss for words. Her gaze moved between her brother and Clara, reassessing the situation. "I see," she finally said, her tone marginally less hostile. "Well, I suppose that's commendable." It wasn't quite approval, but it was a step back from open antagonism. Clara recognized it as the small victory it was. As Olivia retreated to the dining room, Jonathan turned back to Clara. "She'll come around. Eventually." "It's all right," Clara assured him. "Her suspicion comes from a place of love for you and Daniel. I can respect that." Jonathan studied her for a moment. "You're remarkably understanding for someone who's been treated with such hostility." Clara offered a small smile. "In my work with grieving families, I've learned that anger often masks fear and pain. Your sister is afraid of losing control of a situation she's been managing since Eleanor's death. That's understandable." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "You're good at reading people." "Not people in general," Clara clarified. "Just those who are hurting. I've had plenty of practice, including with myself." A comfortable silence fell between them. Two people brought together by tragedy, now tentatively finding their way towards something neither had expected. Mutual respect, perhaps even the beginnings of trust. From upstairs came the soft sound of Daniel calling out. Without hesitation, both Jonathan and Clara moved toward the stairs, their shared concern for the boy creating an unexpected alignment between them. As they reached Daniel's room together, finding him merely asking for water after a bad dream, Clara realized that in the most unlikely of circumstances, healing had begun, not just for Daniel, but perhaps for all of them. The journey ahead would not be simple or straightforward, but for the first time since the accident that had altered all their lives, there was a path forward illuminated by understanding, truth, and the possibility of forgiveness. 3 weeks had passed since the revelations about Clara's connection to the Beaumont family. The atmosphere in the mansion had gradually shifted from tense vigilance to cautious acceptance. Daniel continued to improve, not just in his eating habits, but in his overall demeanor. The dark circles beneath his eyes had faded, and occasional laughter could be heard again in the halls. On a crisp autumn morning, Jonathan stood at the window of his home office watching Clara and Daniel in the garden below. They were collecting fallen leaves, arranging them by color and size as part of what Clara called nature therapy. His son's animated gestures and bright smile were like glimpses of the child he'd been before tragedy struck. "The papers are ready for your signature," Richard announced, spreading documents across Jonathan's desk. Articles of incorporation, bylaws, initial funding transfer, everything needed to establish the Eleanor Beaumont and Maya Johnson Children's Grief Foundation. Jonathan turned from the window, studying the legal papers with a mixture of pride and solemnity. "How soon can we be operational? With your resources? We could begin accepting applications by January," Richard replied, adjusting his glasses. Clara's suggestions for the program structure are remarkably comprehensive. Her experience in pediatric grief counseling is evident. Jonathan nodded, taking a seat at his desk. "She's been working on this every evening after Daniel goes to bed. I've found her in the library past midnight more than once, researching similar programs, identifying gaps in services." Richard hesitated before speaking again. "You seem to have developed a certain respect for her." "She's earned it," Jonathan replied simply, signing the first document with his characteristic decisive stroke. "She's been nothing but dedicated to Daniel's well-being, completely transparent since our confrontation, and she refused $1 million payday in favor of helping other children. That commands respect in my book. And Olivia? Has she come around?" Jonathan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Let's say she's evolved from active hostility to reluctant tolerance. She's even agreed to serve on the Foundation's board, though I suspect that's more to keep an eye on things than genuine enthusiasm." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Parker entered, looking somewhat flustered. "Mr. Beaumont, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a situation in the kitchen. Miss Olivia and Clara are having words." Jonathan sighed, setting down his pen. "What now?" "It's about the Foundation launch event, sir. Miss Olivia has certain ideas about the guest list that Clara finds concerning." "Of course she does," Jonathan muttered, standing. "Excuse me, Richard. Apparently I need to play referee again." He found them in the kitchen, tension radiating between them like heat from an open flame. Olivia stood with her tablet in hand, perfectly coiffed and imposing in her designer suit. Clara, dressed in simple slacks and a cardigan, her work attire having evolved from staff uniform to something more appropriate for her new role, stood her ground with quiet determination. "The Foundation's launch is not a networking opportunity for Beaumont Industries," Clara was saying, her voice firm but respectful. "Inviting potential business partners rather than experts in childhood grief services undermines our entire mission." "Our mission includes securing sustainable funding," Olivia countered. "These connections are valuable for long-term viability." "What's going on?" Jonathan asked. Though the situation was already clear, Olivia turned to him immediately. "I'm trying to explain to Clara that a foundation of this size requires strategic relationships. The guest list I've developed includes key philanthropists and business leaders who could become significant donors, while excluding the very professionals we should be partnering with," Clara added, holding her ground. "We need child psychologists, hospital administrators, social workers, people who will actually refer children to our programs." Jonathan looked between them, appreciating that this at least was a substantive disagreement rather than personal antagonism. "Send me both lists," he decided. "We'll merge them, ensuring balance between potential donors and program partners." Olivia looked as if she might argue, but instead nodded stiffly. "Fine. But the venue remains non-negotiable. The Metropolitan Club has prestige that will attract the right kind of attention. The Children's Museum would be more aligned with our mission," Clara noted quietly. "More accessible, less intimidating, and less likely to impress potential seven-figure donors," Olivia retorted. Jonathan raised a hand, preventing further debate. "The venue stays as planned, but we'll arrange a separate event at the Children's Museum for program partners. That way, we serve both purposes." Neither woman looked entirely satisfied, but both nodded in agreement. Progress, Jonathan thought. 3 weeks ago, this conversation would have devolved into accusations and defense, rather than substantive debate about foundation strategy. "Clara, Daniel is looking for you," he added. He's very excited about showing you something in the library. Clara's expression softened immediately. Thank you, I'll go find him. With a respectful nod to Olivia, she exited the kitchen. Once she was gone, Olivia leaned against the counter, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine concern. You realize what's happening, don't you? She's becoming increasingly embedded in this family. In your life. She's becoming an important part of Daniel's recovery, Jonathan corrected, and a valuable partner in creating something meaningful from our shared tragedy. Is that all it is? Olivia pressed, studying her brother intently. Because from where I stand, it looks like something more is developing. Jonathan straightened, his expression closing. Don't go there, Olivia. Clara is Daniel's caregiver and now the program director for our foundation. That's all. If you say so, Olivia replied, unconvinced. Just remember, it's barely been 8 months since Eleanor died, and Clara's connection to that accident makes any personal relationship considerably complicated. There is no personal relationship, Jonathan stated firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish signing the foundation documents with Richard. As he walked away, Jonathan couldn't entirely dismiss his sister's insinuations. There was something undeniable growing between himself and Clara. Not romance exactly, but a connection forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. He found himself seeking her counsel not just on matters regarding Daniel, but increasingly on foundation decisions and even occasionally business questions that had nothing to do with her role. He valued her perspective, her ability to see beyond wealth and status to what truly mattered. It was refreshing in his world of financial calculations and strategic maneuvering, but anything beyond professional appreciation and gratitude would be inappropriate, he reminded himself, for numerous reasons. In the library, he paused at the doorway, watching Clara and Daniel bent over a large scrapbook. His son's face was animated as he showed her photographs of Eleanor. This was at the beach house in Maine, Daniel explained, pointing to a picture. Mom collected seashells every morning. She said each one told a different story. That's beautiful, Clara replied, her attention fully focused on Daniel. Do you remember any of the stories? Daniel nodded eagerly. There was one about a crab who was afraid of the ocean even though that's where he belonged. Mom said sometimes the things that scare us most are exactly where we need to be. Your mother sounds very wise, Clara said gently. She was, Daniel agreed. Then, with the straightforward honesty only children possess, he added, I think you're wise too, but in a different way. Clara seemed momentarily taken aback by the comparison. That's a lovely thing to say, Daniel, thank you. Jonathan stepped into the room, making his presence known. What's this project you two are working on? Daniel looked up, his face brightening further. Dad, we're making a memory book for Mom. Clara says it's important to keep memories alive by sharing them. That sounds wonderful, Jonathan replied, sitting beside them on the sofa. May I see? As Daniel proudly displayed their work, Jonathan couldn't help but notice how naturally the three of them fit together in this moment, looking at photographs, sharing memories, building something meaningful together. It struck him that this was the first time since Eleanor's death that he'd felt anything resembling peace. Later that evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, Jonathan found Clara in the garden pavilion, working by lamplight on foundation documents. The night air was crisp, stars visible above the carefully illuminated grounds of the estate. You'll catch cold out here, he remarked, offering a steaming mug of tea as he approached. Clara looked up, surprised by his presence. Thank you, she said, accepting the tea gratefully. I needed some fresh air to clear my head. There's so much to organize before the launch. Jonathan took a seat across from her, noting the meticulously arranged papers. You're very thorough. Children's lives will depend on getting this right, she replied simply. Every detail matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant sound of wind through autumn leaves the only interruption. Daniel showed me the memory book you're creating, Jonathan finally said. It's exactly what he needs. What I should have thought to do months ago. Clara shook her head slightly. Grief has no timeline, Jonathan, and sometimes it's easier for someone with a little distance to see what might help. She hesitated before adding, He's doing remarkably well, you know. His resilience is extraordinary. He gets that from his mother, Jonathan replied, his voice softening with memory. Eleanor could weather any storm with grace. I always admired that about her. Daniel has that same quality, Clara observed, and he gets his analytical mind from you. The way he organizes those leaves by species and color. That's all Jonathan Beaumont. He smiled, surprised and touched by her observation. Few people noticed such details about his son. Most saw only the heir to the Beaumont fortune, not the thoughtful, methodical child who categorized leaves and remembered his mother's stories about seashells. "May I ask you something personal?" Jonathan ventured after another comfortable silence. Clara nodded, setting down her pen. "Do you ever regret coming here? After everything, the confrontation, Olivia's suspicion, the complexity of it all?" Clara considered his question carefully. "There have been difficult moments," she admitted. "But no, I don't regret it. Seeing Daniel healing, helping create this foundation that will serve so many children, it feels right. Like maybe this is why our paths crossed in that hospital room." She looked up at the stars, her profile illuminated by the soft pavilion lights. "My sister Maya was a kindergarten teacher. She loved children, believed in their resilience and wisdom. Working with Daniel, creating this foundation in her name alongside Eleanor's, it honors her in a way that feels meaningful." Jonathan studied her, struck by how her presence had transformed their household in just a few short weeks. The mansion that had felt like a mausoleum after Eleanor's death was slowly coming back to life, not erasing the loss but making space for healing alongside it. "The foundation will make a difference," he said with conviction. "I've set up an endowment that ensures its sustainability regardless of future fundraising. Your programs will help thousands of children over the years." Clara turned to him, genuine gratitude in her expression. "Thank you for trusting me with this, especially given how our story began." "Perhaps how our story began is exactly why it's working," Jonathan replied thoughtfully. "We both understand the stakes. We both know the cost of grief firsthand." As they sat together under the autumn sky, Jonathan realized that Olivia had been partly right. Something was indeed developing between himself and Clara. Not a romantic relationship, but something equally profound. A partnership built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the gradual healing power of truth. The foundation they were building would stand as a testament to two lives lost too soon. But perhaps it would also mark the beginning of something unexpected. A new kind of family forged not from blood or marriage, but from the transformative journey through grief toward purpose. In the quiet of the garden pavilion, with Clara focused once more on her work and Jonathan contemplating the stars above, the possibilities of that future hung in the air between them, unspoken, but increasingly undeniable. The Metropolitan Club glittered with understated elegance on the evening of the foundation launch. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the gathering of New York's elite, medical professionals and social workers, a carefully balanced guest list that represented Jonathan and Clara's compromise. At the entrance, a simple yet striking display featured two large portraits. Eleanor Beaumont's radiant smile juxtaposed with Maya Johnson's thoughtful gaze, both women forever connected by fate and now by purpose. 6 months had passed since Clara's truth was revealed, transforming what began as deception into something authentic and profound. The Eleanor Beaumont and Maya Johnson Children's Grief Foundation had moved from concept to reality with remarkable speed, powered by Jonathan's resources and Clara's expertise. "They look beautiful together, don't they?" Daniel said, standing beside Clara at the memorial display. At 9 years old, he appeared transformed from the withdrawn child of a year ago. Dressed in a miniature tuxedo, he had insisted on attending the event despite Olivia's concerns about it being too adult an occasion. "Yes, they do," Clara agreed, straightening his bow tie. "I think they would be proud of tonight, especially proud of you." Daniel nodded solemnly. "Dad says I'm the heart of the foundation, that it all started because of me." "Your father is absolutely right," Clara confirmed. "Without you, none of this would exist." From across the room, Jonathan watched them, struck by the natural ease between them. The boy who once refused to eat now stood tall and confident, ready to address a room full of strangers about the foundation inspired by his journey. "He's come so far," Richard remarked, following Jonathan's gaze. "We all have." Jonathan nodded, taking a sip of his sparkling water. "Sometimes I wonder what Eleanor would make of all this." "Of Clara. She would approve," Richard said with certainty. "You know she would." Before Jonathan could respond, Olivia approached, immaculate in designer formal wear, tablet in hand as always. "The program begins in 10 minutes, everything's in place." She hesitated, then added with surprising sincerity, "It's going to be perfect, Jonathan. Eleanor would be proud." Coming from Olivia, this acknowledgement carried particular weight. Her journey from suspicion to acceptance of Clara had been gradual, but significant. While never becoming close friends, They had developed a functional professional relationship built on mutual respect for their complementary skills. Olivia's business acumen, balancing Clara's programming expertise. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced, "please take your seats, the program will begin shortly." As guests settled at elegantly appointed tables, Clara and Daniel made their way to the head table where Jonathan waited. The three of them formed a striking picture, not quite a traditional family, but unmistakably a unit, bonded by shared purpose and hard-won trust. Jonathan rose as they approached, pulling out Clara's chair with natural courtesy. Their eyes met briefly, a world of unspoken understanding passing between them. Over the months of working together, their connection had deepened into something neither had anticipated, a partnership that transcended professional boundaries without crossing them. "Not yet. Nervous?" he asked quietly as Daniel took his seat. "Terrified," Clara admitted with a small smile. "Public speaking was never my strong suit." "You'll be magnificent," Jonathan assured her. "Just speak from your heart, as you did with Daniel." The program began with a brief video showcasing the Foundation's mission, helping children navigate grief through innovative programs, counseling services, and community support. Images of smiling children at the pilot program summer camp dissolved into statistics about childhood grief, then transitioned to the Foundation's ambitious goals for its first 5 years. When Jonathan took the podium, the room fell respectfully silent. "1 year ago," he began, his strong voice carrying effortlessly, "my world collapsed when my wife Eleanor was taken from us in a tragic accident. In that same accident, another remarkable woman, Maya Johnson, also lost her life. 2 families torn apart in an instant." He paused, gathering himself. What I couldn't see then, blinded by grief, was how these parallel tragedies would eventually converge to create something meaningful, not just for my son and me, but potentially for thousands of grieving children across the country. Jonathan gestured toward Clara and Daniel. "The catalyst for this foundation sits at that table. My son, Daniel, whose courage in the face of devastating loss continues to inspire me daily, and Clara Johnson, who came into our lives under unusual circumstances, but whose compassion, expertise, and dedication have proven transformative." As he continued outlining the Foundation's vision, Clara felt a small hand slip into hers beneath the table. Daniel squeezed gently, offering silent support for her upcoming speech. When her turn came, Clara approached the podium with outward composure that belied her racing heart. Looking out at the assembled guests, wealthy donors in designer attire alongside social workers in their modest best, she was momentarily overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her here. "I stand before you as someone who has experienced grief from multiple perspectives," she began, her voice steady. "As a sister who lost her only sibling, as a healthcare professional who has held the hands of those saying final goodbyes, and as someone who has worked with children struggling to make sense of a world suddenly emptied of someone they love." Clara glanced toward Daniel, drawing strength from his encouraging smile. "Children's grief is often overlooked, minimized, or misunderstood. Adults tell them to be strong, to move on, when what they really need is space to remember, to feel, to process their loss in their own way and time." She paused, making eye contact with several attendees. "The programs we're launching tonight are designed to create that space through art therapy, peer support groups, nature retreats, and individualized counseling." As she outlined the Foundation's programs, Clara felt the passion that had driven her career choices fuel her words. This was her purpose, clearer now than ever before, helping children find their way through the darkest of times. "Maya loved a quote from the author Lemony Snicket," Clara said, her voice softening. "If we wait until we're ready, we'll be waiting for the rest of our lives." None of us were ready for the losses that connected our lives, but we didn't wait to create meaning from them. And the children we serve can't wait either. When she finished to enthusiastic applause, Clara returned to her seat, relieved and emotionally drained. Jonathan's hand briefly covered hers, a gesture of support and something more, something neither of them had yet defined. The most powerful moment of the evening, however, came when Daniel took the podium, standing on a discreet platform that allowed him to reach the microphone. The room collectively held its breath as the small boy in his perfect tuxedo looked out at the crowd with remarkable poise. "My mom died when I was 8, he began simply. "After she was gone, I didn't want to eat anymore. Nothing tasted good. Nothing felt good." His honesty silenced the room completely. "The doctors couldn't help me. Nobody could. Daniel glanced back at Clara and Jonathan before continuing. Then Miss Clara came to our house. She didn't make me eat. She just sat with me and told me about her sister Maya, who died in the same accident as my mom. She understood how I felt. A few attendees dabbed at their eyes as Daniel spoke. I started eating again because Miss Clara made me feel safe. She showed me that it's okay to be sad about Mom, but it's also okay to be happy sometimes too. That's what our foundation wants to do. Help kids feel safe while they're sad, so they can start to feel better. He looked directly at the audience, his young face serious. Some kids don't have people to help them when someone they love dies. They need our foundation. They need people like Miss Clara who understand. People who know that sometimes you need to talk about the person who died, and sometimes you just need someone to sit with you. As Daniel concluded to a standing ovation, Clara felt tears on her cheeks. Jonathan's eyes, too, shone with emotion as he rose to embrace his son, lifting him from the platform with proud, steady hands. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, pledges of support, and meaningful connections with program partners. By the time the last guests departed, Clara was exhausted but fulfilled, knowing they had laid a solid foundation for the work ahead. "You were amazing," Jonathan told her as they stood in the now quiet ballroom. Daniel had fallen asleep on a sofa in the adjoining lounge, the excitement of the evening finally catching up to him. "All of you," he amended, glancing toward his sleeping son. "We did it," Clara agreed, slipping off her uncomfortable heels with a sigh of relief. Maya would be so proud to see her name on something this meaningful. So would Eleanor. Jonathan nodded, loosening his bow tie. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said after a moment. "For the foundation, of course, but also..." He hesitated, then continued more quietly. "For us." Clara looked up at him, the question in her eyes encouraging him to continue. "This past year has been transformative," Jonathan said carefully. "When Eleanor died, I couldn't imagine ever finding purpose again, let alone..." He trailed off, searching for words. "Connection?" Clara offered softly. "Yes," he acknowledged. "What began as the strangest of circumstances has become something I value deeply. Our work together, what we've built, it matters. But beyond that, Clara, you matter to me, to us." Clara took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling between them. "Jonathan, You don't need to say anything now," he assured her. "I know there are complications, history between us that makes this unconventional. I just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's a place for you in our lives that could be more than foundation director or Daniel's caregiver." Clara glanced toward the sleeping boy, then back to Jonathan. "I care deeply for both of you," she said truthfully, "more than I ever expected to. But you're right about the complications. We both carry histories that deserve respect." Jonathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. No rush, no pressure, just an open door, whenever the time feels right. They stood together in comfortable silence, the evening's success surrounding them like a blessing. From tragedy had come purpose. From deception had come truth. From grief had come healing. Not complete, never complete, but substantial and genuine. As they moved to wake Daniel and head home, Clara paused by the memorial display featuring Eleanor and Maya. The two women seemed to gaze back at them with approval, perhaps even joy at what their intertwined fates had ultimately created. "Ready?" Jonathan asked, Daniel drowsy but awake in his arms. Clara looked at them, this unexpected family she had found in the wake of loss, and nodded. "Ready," she confirmed, knowing the word applied to much more than just their departure. Outside, the night sky over Manhattan glittered with stars, mirroring the lights of the city below. Life moved forward, as it always does after loss, not replacing what was but building something new beside it, something that honored the past while embracing the future. As they stepped into the waiting car, Clara felt Maya's presence, as she often did in moments of significance, not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as the continuing influence of a life well lived, a connection that transcended death. "Miss Clara?" Daniel murmured sleepily from his father's arms. "We did good tonight, didn't we?" Clara smiled, her heart full. "Yes, Daniel, we did very good." And as the car pulled away from the curb carrying them home together, Clara knew with certainty that this unexpected journey, begun in grief and deception but transformed by truth and compassion, had always been leading exactly here, to purpose, to healing, to family, redefined. The circle was complete. Subscribe to The Maid Secret for more emotional stories where compassion overcomes arrogance and quiet hearts leave the loudest mark.